everyone, and welcome to episode 125 of the History Hotline. My name is Deanne Lincook, and I am joined today by a very special and important guest. I'm very excited to be sat down with her today. We have sat down once before, not on this podcast, but on another one, on the Queen Mary University of London Alumni podcast. And here we are again today. So welcome, Amma Badu, to the podcast. No worries. So, me and Amma, we go way back. We're not going to say how many years, because time is just an illusion. I'm really excited to have Amma on here today, partly because we've had conversations like this for a long time in person on the podcast we did for Queen Mary. And just generally, I just feel like watching her work and the things that she's done and achieved over the years that I've kind of known her and been kind of seeing the things she's been about has been really incredible and really inspiring as well. So just for some, no worries. For some insight, Amma studied English at Queen Mary and graduated in 2018 and is assistant editor at Faber and Faber, and is also the Fab website editor at Faber Children's and the voice of Shudu, who is the world's first virtual model. And we're going to talk about all of those things, all the things English, children's publishing, virtual models, and website editing if we get there. So welcome, Amma.
Hi.
It's good to have you today.
Very excited to be here.
Thank you. So I thought we'd start with some quick fire questions as we do on the podcast, so you can get to know Amma, find out a little bit about what she's about and what she's interested in. So I'll start with, it's going to be quite a bookish episode today.
Absolutely.
I think that makes sense. So what are you currently, if you are currently reading something, what are you currently reading?
Okay, so I'm kind of in between books at the moment. I have just finished reading Clean by Juno Dawson, which was really an interesting look at sobriety, class. Like, it was just a very interesting conversation. But it's
nice.
Something I'm editing at the moment, so it was really lovely to have that. And I have just started listening to Britney Spears' autobiography, and I don't often do autobiographies, but there's like so much hype and press around it. It's broken loads of records already within the first couple of weeks, and something that I'm really taken by is just how generous and compassionate she is, even to people that the world would not blame if just read them fulfilled.
Absolutely.
And I actually, with things like that, I prefer to listen to it, even though she's not narrating it.
Yeah.
There's something about hearing it than sort of just reading it. I kind of read and listen at the same time.
Absolutely. I love that. I've heard clips go around, the viral clips that have been going around on TikTok and Twitter, and I'm intrigued. I'm not really a big autobiography person, but if I am going to listen to one, if I am going to take one in, it will be listening. I do like when they narrate them, but I can understand why Britney isn't doing that. Is it Jennifer? Somebody that
it is Michelle Williams.
Michelle, that's the one.
So
so I've heard clips of it, and I feel like there's one bit though that I think they needed maybe Britney to come in, where she talks about when Justin Timberlake bumps into was it Genuine or someone, the rapper, and he goes into that black sun, and
Well, this is it. I kept hearing those clips as well. That's why I really want to read it. It's interesting, but also I think because like we've grown up with her, so like hearing her talk about stuff that we would have sort of seen in real time, and just seeing how much the world has progressed and changed and how different the conversations are now.
Absolutely.
Quite powerful too.
Definitely.
It just has my mind sort of tinkering.
Yeah, I can imagine, because she isn't like the icon of our childhood, like growing up in the like 90s, early 2000s. She is that person, and as kids, there's so much we wouldn't have been exposed to or even known about. So I think I might add that to my Christmas list then.
Do yes.
For sure. Brilliant. Right, now, this is a hard question, and I know it'll be difficult for you, but what is your favorite book? And you can give a reason as to why it's your favorite, because you can have different kind of favorites. I feel.
Okay. I will say that one of my favourite books is The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. And the reason I will say that is because there was I read it when I was in maybe 8 or 9. And I remember reading it and feeling very seen. And actually, you know, like sometimes I look back and I've recently sort of come out and sort of like identify as queer and stuff. But at the time, I didn't know that. And I remember reading this and thinking, oh my gosh, I would love to have a relationship like Celie and Shug Avery, and not thinking anything of it, just thinking like, didn't connect the dots as to my own identity.
Yeah.
But there was just something about it. And there's a line in there that talks about trees. This is so specific, but there's a line in there that talks about trees, and I'm really big on nature, but there was something about, she compared herself at one earlier in the book about something about being wood, and there's a later point where she's sort of coming into herself and she talks about becoming a tree, and I just thought the sort of connections between those points were just so poignant at the time, and now it resonates even more so.
Absolutely.
I reread it a couple of years ago, and yeah, it was interesting. So I was looking at my old, like the original book that I first read, and I had annotated and underlined everything from year 8.
True English student.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually remember it was one of the first books I properly annotated, and I felt like a bit of a rebel because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm using pen and not pencil.
Writing in a book.
Writing a book. But yes, reading it again a couple of years ago with the same book, with the same notes, it was really interesting to see what I picked up then and what I sort of pulled out now. It's it's very dear to my heart, that book.
I can imagine. And it is an interesting point as well about rereading things and kind of putting yourself back in the mindset that you were in when you first read it, or at the point, you know, when you read it and it meant something. So wow, yeah. And
this is it. I think it's like every time you read a book, it's the version of you that's reading it.
Absolutely.
It's a very different person approaching this book, even if you've read it before. And it's quite an interesting exercise. And I don't get to do that often outside of a work capacity, like to reread stuff. So being able to do that, it just really felt beautiful. It felt like a real moment.
Yeah, definitely. I've read, well, I've just finished Open Water by Caleb Nelson, and I feel like I'm going to reread that at various points in my life. Like I can see me carrying this copy until I'm old and passing it on to a child or a grandchild or a niece or something, because like, I don't know, I feel like that book moved me in a way I wasn't expecting. And the feelings that it drew out of me, I need to keep reconnecting with that book. I feel like there's just so much in it. I probably will read it again before the end of the year. I can't believe someone can write so beautifully.
Oh, okay, so
like, how dare he? Sorry.
Very dare.
Who told you?
On my shelf, and I keep wanting to read, and I'm like, I'm just waiting for the right time. But you just inspired me. So by the end of the year, I also want to read it.
Literally, I was on a train and I had it in my bag, but I also had my iPad, which has all my like more history books on. And I thought, you know what, the train was the slow train from Birmingham to London. It's like 2.5 hours. I got 75% through that book in that 2.5 hours, and I finished it when I got home. And it is that book.
Okay. I'm inspired.
Definitely. Right, we're gonna move away slightly from the novels. We are on a history podcast. Do you have, and if you do, what is your favorite historical time period?
Oh,
and it doesn't have to be one of like you would have to live there. Like that really restricts us as Black people.
No. I thought this was a really interesting question. I've been thinking about this a lot. There are a couple of things that stand out to me, and I was like, oh, do I want to say this or do I not? So I'll start off by saying anything that is pre-colonial.
Okay.
There's a distance pre-colonial really interests me. But then to kind of counteract what I've just said, there's something about Ghana specifically, just after independence, that I really am interested in. And it's not just Ghana, actually. When you look back, I remember writing an article about this years ago, but when you look at a lot of the imagery from sort of Western Africa, across Africa, around the time of independence, there's this energy that you get from those photographs. There's an energy that you get from how people talk about it. And there's this point of, you're at the precipice of this newness, this discovery, this liberation, it just seems like such a delicious moment. And obviously, with hindsight now, we know so much has happened since. Just being at that moment of promise and hope. Hearing Nkrumah talk about like Pan-Africanism and sort of really uniting the continent, like, I can't imagine what it must have been like to have been coming of age in that time, with all this sort of hope before you. So I've been thinking a lot about that. I'm at the moment researching to hopefully write, and it's looking at sort of that time period, as well as around the coup and now. And I just think there's such interesting points of parallel in each of those three situations. But there's something about the promise of a greater future, I think, and any moment in history that marks that time, I think, is just
that feeling of hope.
Yes.
There's a lot of power and strength in that.
Yes,
absolutely.
absolutely.
I like that answer.
Yeah.
And then maybe this links, but do you have a favorite historical figure? Maybe it links to that time.
Someone I think it doesn't actually, but someone I think often is Asantewaa, who is Ghanaian. She's Ashanti. She was the Ashanti Hima, and she led soldiers to battle against the British, who were obviously colonizing at the time. And I don't know enough about her. I don't know as much about her as I would like to know. But there is such a fierceness in things that I do know about her and things I've heard about her. And I think about how Ghanaian society is set up and all of these things and, patriarchy and matriarchy and all these sort of elements to it. And just thinking about this woman, he was just like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. We're not taking this. Absolutely not. And fighting hard for it. That really, really does interest me.
Absolutely. We love a powerful woman over here.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have a historical figure that you think more people need to know about, should know about, and don't? Which, I mean, in Britain is pretty much anyone in Black British history because people don't know him.
All of the kind of linked to what I was saying earlier as in Nkrumah. I think a lot of his thoughts, ideas were interesting, but I think also the time in which he came to power and came to influence and the other people he influenced in his sort of period is someone that I just think we need to know more about, especially from a diasporic perspective. And I also think, sorry, this is not connected to this, but it is connected to diaspora. My mind's been thinking all these things. What I find quite interesting is the ways in which through time and history culture has traveled and how, again, to storytelling, I think about something like the Anansi story, for example, which originated in Ghana and has just traveled across. I think about gods, I think about religious forms, I think about food, I think about language, I think about how enduring all those things are. I think I'm forever looking at the past and seeing how it's reflected now in the present and what's to come in the future. And there's just such a beautiful sense of synergy with all those things. Also, the fact that so much is the same and so much is different at the same time. I think a lot about, Nkrumah's rhetoric and stuff, and it's still very relevant to today.
Yeah.
The things that we carry with us. And I think our world is changing so much, but actually there's still so many things that we hold on to, even when we don't realize we hold on to it.
Absolutely.
And how powerful that is, because I think it's very easy to feel lost, but we have sort of a whole history and heritage behind us. We have ancestors behind us sort of cheerleading us on, but also showing us a way. And there's such power in that.
Yeah. In a past and a future.
Yes.
In a sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Definitely. Wow.
Yeah.
Do you have a historical event that you think everyone or more people should know about?
Oh my gosh. I think we're talking specifically about Black British culture. I think there is this isn't a specific event. It's more a time period. I think there's a lot of so at uni I did a course, I think you did as well, Black British writing.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
And the Black didn't mean just Black as we take it today. It was very much Black and Asian. And I think there's this real misconception that people from the Commonwealth all kind of came at the same time and we all kind of came with the same background, and there's very much not the case. I remember very early on having a conversation with my dad. He was like, there's such a big difference between the Caribbean people who came across and the African people who came across. And there's such an interesting relationship that we have within the Black British diaspora, even now, that has stemmed from a lot of that. The passage to here is not one and the same. And I think there needs to be a much closer analysis of the differences, and what that means and what that entails. Just because we're all people of color doesn't mean our experiences coming here were the same, and it doesn't mean there's just such nuance within that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just don't think that we explore enough as British history, not just Black history, but British history.
100%.
Yeah.
Nice. Definitely. I think it's a task that is one that I'm not going to say it's necessarily easy, because it's easier to very much lump everybody together, as inaccurate as that is. And there are so many nuances as well, beyond just, you might have come from Accra, Ghana, you came from Kingston, Jamaica, you came from Mumbai. There's also, the class of people that came from each country, what age you travelled at. Were you a baby, Were you an elderly person? Were you married? Were you single? Were you employed, skilled? There are so many nuances. And I think the discipline, and that I mean like in the kind of academic setting, I feel like that work is really being done. I think the way you do history academically is very, very specific. You really can't make generalizations like that. They're just not accepted. But unfortunately, I think the way that public history is shaped and framed, it's very BAME, as I like to call it. All of you non-white people go into this bubble, and this is your story. You can either pick it up and go with it and pick up your diversity coins on the way, or you can leave it. And that's why you've got, people bringing in like Indian figures within Black History Month in Britain, and African American people finding themselves in the narrative. And it's not to say we're trying to exclude people. It's just the fact that actually there's more specificity, there's more nuance, there's more complexity in the narrative, and it is dangerous actually, as your dad was saying, to be lumping even just Caribbean and African people together, let alone breaking down that continent and breaking down that region.
It's lazy as well.
It's so lazy.
It's like lazy. We're restricting ourselves to a period of time. We're restricting ourselves to like a time of year where we can discuss these things. But what if we integrated it in the curriculum that's already there? What if we integrated it just as it should be? It just
Please, you're on. You're preaching to the choir on this podcast. It is. It's completely true. It's completely accurate. And also, we like just thinking more about that. People that travel at different times, because if you came here, even in the interwar years, we never talk about that. We don't talk about pre-World War One. In the 1920s, you had so many African students that were wealthy or have done really well in school. Same for the Caribbean. Loads of students coming on specific scholarships that are set up, whether it's a Rhodes Scholarship, stuff in Oxford and Cambridge, you know the story. And that's a completely different class and time, let alone then you think about people that have come as recently as like 2020.
This is it.
There's people arriving every day, and that's not their narrative. That's not the history of their family, of anything they can even kind of attach themselves to.
It's and what I find interesting as well then is that when I'm then having sort of real world conversations with my age mates, people older than me, especially if they're English, by English I mean white, it's the way they perceive the narrative is so far removed from what I know to be true. And I don't always take the time in that moment to like educate, because it shouldn't be my responsibility to, but it's just so interesting to hear the perception from like outside in. I'm now thinking just about what you've said there, like what it means to be, for example, from the Commonwealth and be Ghanaian, or what it means to be from the Commonwealth and from Zimbabwe, for example, is very different. So could you imagine those people coming across from different parts of just the continent itself, with a different understanding of what it means to be? It's just so many things that you can dig into.
Absolutely. And it's funny as well, because if you're in Africa, and I'm saying that as it's a continent, you're in a specific country, a specific place. No, I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that someone that is Ghanaian outside of Ghana, they're not going to say I'm African.
No, exactly.
You're going to say tribe, area that you've come from, a village, a town. You're that. Absolutely. It's only when you actually leave your home that you then have to be Caribbean people,
Yeah.
all Caribbean people were Jamaican,
Yeah.
according to
Yeah.
England.
This is it.
Like you, and it's, I think Stuart Hawes talks about it. Like you become a West Indian when you get to Britain. In the Caribbean, you weren't West Indian; you were just from Kingston, or you were from St Anne's, or you were from wherever else.
Yeah.
You know. So, and that kind of all builds into stuff like identity, and then how we see ourselves versus how the world and society are seeing us.
This is it. This is it. It also makes me think very much about this idea of blackness, and like going on about it. So I went to the States in the summer for a wedding. Nice. It was really lovely. But I was so aware of the, I can only call irony of me, a Ghanaian descendant who lives in London, traveling to America. I was just like, oh my gosh, there's a book here somewhere, surely. But what I find interesting is this idea of blackness. Yeah. Well, what does that actually mean? Because we've created it, and we've created it because we need to. But outside of the West, this idea of blackness doesn't exist.
No, doesn't.
And so this sense of identity is so it's not tangible. It's not. It shifts so completely depending on where you are. And it's so interesting that I am of Ghanaian descent, but if I go to Ghana, I'm a foreigner. I'm you know, like it's just,
that's a whole nother kettle of fish.
Exactly the thing. Like it's.
I'm an English girl in Jamaica.
Honestly. And it's like, okay, but like if we just take a minute to stop doing the lazy thing and actually re-dissect things, you just open up such a beautiful tapestry, such a rich tapestry of so much identity and being. And also I find that then in a way, in many ways, it's quite liberating. Like if we give ourselves titles and we fall into categories because we come together and we unify. But when those categories and things change based on where you are, it gives you an opportunity to explore who else you can be without that. Like, what else could I be? What else? It's just a different way of perceiving self. And I'm always advocating for that. What happens if we see ourselves a different way? What happens if we connect to different things? What happens if we just perceive it in a different way?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think it will be, I hope anyway, it will be kind of our generation to have those, not necessarily just to have the conversations, but to actually do the work, to really think those things through.
I'm more optimistic than I am because I don't love our generation. I just think, you know what? I think we've done a lot of great things, but I think we still have such a long way to go. And I worry sometimes that we spend so much time obsessing over identity politics that it then means that, does it dilute the message? No, it doesn't dilute the message, but I just worry that we don't put as much energy in other places. And what I worry most about is, I think we do a lot of advocacy work, and we do a lot of work to make sure that laws and things do the work that they need to do, protecting them where they need to protect. What concerns me is, to what extent are we getting into people's hearts and minds? And I think that's where the real change comes in. Every now and then, every few years, something happens and it just makes me think, you know, we've been calling out for XYZ for so long. How are we still at this point? And also, as long as humans have been on the earth, you mean to tell me we're still working on things? There's always been people of colour on this earth. There's always been women on this earth. There's always been... So why are we... It feels a bit primitive sometimes. I'm just like, how are we still here? You know?
And I think you get that sense even more if you speak to elders. Because it's like they did the same battle. And you're like...
It's a different world. It's like... And how can we be saying the same things as those who came before us? You know, it's... A lot of work has been done, and I'm not knocking that. But I just... we have a long way to go, and that's scary.
It is, but I do feel like that kind of impatience we have with the slow change, I hope it drives us, that kind of impatience. I think we have less patience than our grandparents and our parents to tolerate certain things, and I hope that drives us and keeps pushing us, because we are moving.
Absolutely.
Just pick up the pace.
Yeah. That's it. That's it. Oh, yeah.
Right. Or finish off these quick fires that
Yes.
aren't really actually that quick because require a lot of thought and explanation. But what book would you recommend that everybody reads at least once in their life? I've been seeing a tweet, just before you answer, I've been seeing a tweet going around of saying like, what radicalized you? I think it's in the context of what's happening in Palestine, but also just generally. And I've been thinking a lot about it for me, and I've been trying to think: is it a book? Is it a moment? Is it something I've been through? But maybe they can tie together. You know, like is there something you read that kind of shifted your mindset so much that you think everybody also should have?
And I'm still reading it, and it's gonna be a cliche one, but it's all about love by bell hooks. Because I think we think about love and we think about it in a familial setting, or we think about it in terms of friendships. What does it mean when we talk about love in the capacity of politics? What does it mean when we talk about love in the capacity of work? What does it mean when we really insert love in every single part of our lives? And what's interesting, there's a lot of like spiritual growth and changes that's happening within me. I grew up very much with the church. And so I grew up with like Christian rhetoric, and embedded in that is love. Regardless of how sometimes the people may act, embedded in that is love. So then taking this principle of love and applying it in absolutely every single element of our lives and thinking about how it reflects it's just been such a beautiful thing. And so then when we are having conversations about specific things that are happening in the world, it no longer becomes about this person and that person, this group of people and that group of people, but really stepping forward in love and consideration. And I think we allow these fake things to divide us and cause all these issues. But if we were all to just stop and step and walk in love, what does that look like across the board outside of the family home? And so I think that I've been sort of mulling on that a lot more as the things that are going on in the news are going on, and as I think for a long time I thought about those things as separate. You know, there's like, what does it look like when what is it like if our governments are governed by love? If that is the priority, and it sounds so simple and so obvious. That's what the beauty of that book is. It seems so simple, but it isn't. It, as we can see.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Definitely. I've not read it through, I will say. I've always read that books in extracts. I read it in, I think I did a feminism module in English, and I think I read it there, and I cited it a lot. I cited different parts of it, but also some of other bell Hooks's work, more so than this. In conversation with, you know, the Audre Lordes and all the wonderful women that have written about these things. But I don't, you know.
See, it's a hard question. You asked me.
Yeah, no, you're really right. I'm literally looking at my bookshelf.
Yeah. I do that all the time too,
as I speak, and I'm gonna say I've got 2 books in mind, basically. No, I've got 3 now. Black Skin, White Masks. Is in an academic-y kind of setting. The first time I realized that the experiences I had as a Black person had been theorized. And that was quite powerful to me, because I hadn't ever seen myself in a theory sense. I went to an all-girls school. We did a lot of feminist readings of things. Even at a younger age, we looked at a lot of feminist theory. We always looked at women. I understood what it meant to be a woman, to be in a marginalized group in that sense. But nobody ever really kind of told me that in the kind of Black sense. And then when you start reading it as a Black woman,
was it in uni that you first?
It was first year, that English in practice, or no, reading theory and interpretation.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Such a good.
But I say that to say, like, it's same for me. But it's such a shame that we have to get to the point of uni before we can discover ourselves in that way.
And doing an English degree, which doesn't serve everyone, you know.
Exactly.
Not everybody's going to get there.
Exactly the point. But yeah.
Absolutely. So that. And then I would also, and I'm looking at it, Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I think I did that for my A-level coursework, and it's kind of, I think with coursework you're kind of on your own. No one else is doing that book. You're not going through it as a class. You're reading it and you're going to write about it. And I feel like I went on a journey with Maya Angelou in a historical sense, in understanding Black girlhood and Black womanhood, and that, so that text. But also I think it dealt with pain in a really interesting way.
Absolutely.
Not in a way that I'd kind of ever read before. And kind of knowing Maya Angelou as a poet, as a writer, as a figure within, she was alive at the time as well. And kind of knowing her as a person that's just about, shall we say, esteemed, but still very much within reach of society. She's there at Obama's inauguration. Do you know what I mean? She's part of the fabric of society.
Absolutely.
And then reading this work and this pain, and then kind of seeing the present version of her, still alive, still fighting, still going, still breathing, still loving. That was really powerful for me.
For that book, it's she talks about pain, but she talks about pain almost from a point of healing or healing.
Yeah,
and I hadn't
absolutely.
seen that before until I read that book.
Yeah,
and that was quite stunning to me. Because you can read something and know when someone's still in that healing process and when they have been able to release it. And she's very much released it.
Absolutely.
That's an incredible amount of pain to have released, which just gives hope. It gives hope that we are not defined by our pain, but also we can heal from it in a really gorgeous way.
Definitely. I've really not answered that question properly because I've given you two and I want to say a third one.
Brilliant.
Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams. On a historical level, it's basically the book where he breaks down the fact that slavery didn't end in the British colonies for moral reasons or economic. And whilst a lot of the points in his argument kind of don't necessarily stand today, following further writing and research from a lot of scholars in the field, his argument to me was so important. And when I read that, I really needed to hear that at that time. It completely shifted the way I saw history, written by white people, to glorify and to uphold white supremacy when dealing with what was happening in the Caribbean, what was happening in parts of Africa and in Asia, and in terms of empire and colonization. So I've done an episode on that book before. And I will talk about it all the time. I think people that listen to this podcast will be sick of me. But this is the power of books, and this is why you're here, Amma, because there's no real better person to talk about all these books really than you. And it leads quite beautifully on. Look at me segueing.
Love it.
What you do in publishing. Who'd have thought? So, with an English degree, as we all know, you can kind of do anything. It always astounds me like what people ended up doing from the English degree, what they've gone into, like the range of things that are on offer, just because of I think the work that you do in English, people think it's just reading novels and poetry and like analysing sentences. No, it's way more than
so much more.
And you've decided you went into publishing. Was that always a plan?
Absolutely not. So there was a lot of contention about me going to university. I came from a very conservative, shall we say, Christian background. I'm not going to name where, but there was very much this idea that a degree will not serve you, because the system is not going to be on for long enough for you to need one. So I had a lot of people in my church just being like, oh my gosh, you shouldn't go. I had an uncle who was like, okay, that's not scripturally accurate, but also like, why would you not go? So I was like, okay, here's what I'm gonna I decided to take a gap year, and I did a lot of volunteer work in my gap year, and I worked as well, and I just needed the time to make that decision my own self. I already applied for uni, but I just applied for it with a gap year in mind. When my teachers found this out, they were livid, but I was like, I need the time. And I came to the end of the year and I was like, okay, let's go to uni because I want to be a teacher. Nice. And then my uncle, the same uncle that was side-eyeing me, was like, okay, so you want to be a teacher, that's great. Why don't you do something like English first, or do something that's sort of broader first? And then you can specialize afterwards, and then you've got options. And there was a lot of contention about this within the family as well. My dad, on the other hand, was very much like, do whatever brings you joy. Like,
nice.
He's very traditional in some sense and very untraditional in a lot of other sense. In a sense that count, he's very untraditional. And he was just like, you just need to be happy, you need to be able to support yourself, do what's going to help you to do that.
Nice.
So I applied for uni at Queen Mary. The two that I wanted to go into was either Queen Mary or there was an art and English course at Reading. I went to Reading and I'm like, oh my God, it's very white. I cannot be inspired here. So hence I ended up at Queen Mary. But I had, by the time I graduated, I'd been working in education for about 5 or so years. And I just didn't want to go down that route.
Yeah.
I always went to teach in a secondary school. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I've done a lot of in education, not quite as a teacher, but in education. The system is far too broken. I can't do that. And then I didn't quite know where I would end up.
Yeah.
After uni, I was freelancing as a writer as well, both for the digitals who work with Shudi, but also for a magazine called Glam Africa. And I'd gotten to a point at the end of mid 2019 where I was like, okay, I need something different. I need something that's going to fuel me creatively in a different way. I didn't know what that looks like, but I kind of wanted to do that. And I came across a couple of roles. There was an editor position at Usborne, which is a children's publisher. And I applied for it and I got through to the second round of interviews, which I say because I had no experience. And so to be able to even get that far, now that I know more about publishing, so I've gotten that far, it was like, oh, there's something there. But what I loved about it is that I had an opportunity to get my art stuff out. I had to do a brief for a book for children's. It was like a myth from Scotland. It's like, okay, how would you make this look? What would you do to it? What commission for the illustrator? Well, I got my little pens out, I got my little art set out, I got my paints, I got everything out, and I just felt like I was really doing something creative in that way. Yeah. And that made me think, yes, publishing, but children's publishing specifically. And then from there I went to Faber as an intern, and I've then worked my way up to assistant editor. So I talk about my career as a bit of a portfolio career. I'm one of those people that's very much governed by how something feels. I know that doesn't work for everyone. But I can feel when something is no longer for me and no longer serving me. And I think it's very easy to feel that we have to stick things out. I'm also one of those people that I need to enjoy what I do. Some people can compartmentalize and they can have a 9 to 5 that they don't enjoy, but really find other ways of enjoyment and fulfillment. And that's brilliant. I'm not one of those people. I grew up in a very working class home / a little bit below the poverty line. And so the idea of just sort of changing a job when it no longer serves you is ludicrous. It's like, what do you mean you're just leaving? And like, what, how? But I do think it takes a lot of courage. I think if I were to go back in time, I probably would have said to myself, keep working. I would apply for other things. But I just think life is too short. We spend so much of our time at work. Not do what you enjoy.
Absolutely.
And not do what fuels you. And also, I think how the education system is set up, especially in secondary school, you're made to sort of choose one path for the whole rest of your life. But we're forever growing and changing and evolving. So what we go into uni wanting to do will change at the other end of the line. And that's okay. Change as many times as we need to change. We don't have to do one thing our whole lives.
I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's beautiful. And I think it speaks to the fact that you have managed to kind of bring in, I guess English it's an academic degree, of course, but it also has so much creativity in it. And you said your kind of artistry and your creative practices all into this kind of one realm of publishing and children's publishing. And it is wonderful that you have been able to do that and kind of bring those kind of worlds together. I wondered, what are the kind of challenges, maybe, as a question? I know that we've spoken about in the past, kind of increasing the representation of texts that have Black protagonists, or so children that look like you and me can see themselves in a book, or for Black authors and that kind of thing. I guess, are there challenges related to that, and how has kind of maybe that popped up or cropped up in your work?
I think about being in-house. When I started, I was one of one of two Black women. That has since changed. But I remember when I got this role, one of my colleagues said, you're the first, not this role. So when I got hired full time, I was told you are probably one of the first, if not the first, Black person to be on the editorial team at Faber.
That's insane.
Faber's not a new company,
right?
Yeah. And we haven't fact checked it, so I like to say, first, but it's
like,
I think it's a privilege, but also it brings such visibility, good and bad. And I often think I am a Black woman, but I'm also not just a Black woman, and so that should not dictate my taste. A Black queer woman, there's so much in terms of the publishing industry that needs changing and shifting when it comes to that. And I think what I'm grateful for is that I'm in a team of women who really get that and who understand that and who will champion for me and champion for those like me without me having to tell them to do that. They just do it naturally, almost, or not naturally. They've had to do a lot of work on themselves to get to that point. But that for me is very refreshing. I think something that's been interesting is when I first started in 2020 in publishing, I think there was a lot of pressure on Black writers, in particular writers of colour, to write about issues and to write about struggles and to write from a very specific perspective.
Right.
We run the Fab Prize every year, which is a sort of open call to writers and illustrators who aren't published.
Yeah.
And so seeing the amount of work we got when I first started, the way the work is now, almost every submission now that we read is fantastical, or it's magical, or it's not focusing solely on struggle. And that to me is a huge testament to how far the industry's come in the last 3 years.
Nice.
I think a lot of writers come feeling that they have to sort of talk about all of the things or discuss all of the things, specifically if they are from a marginalized community.
Yeah.
And that's not the case.
That's good.
I often get a lot of questions about, do I need to write something, that will sell? Do I need to... I keep saying the industry will catch up with you. Write what is in your heart to write, because at the end of the day, the person you need to connect with is an individual person.
Yep.
That person will champion you as long as you need them to. But write what comes from you, because if it comes from your heart, it's going to connect someone else's heart.
Absolutely. That's the way we've spoken about all the books we've spoken about today.
Absolutely.
They've written, and this is the thing with books as well. Even if I know we live in a capitalist society and things have to sell, but if the book comes out, like Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery, when it initially came out, it had a run. They stopped it. It didn't get published for ages. It's literally got republished in 2020 because we realised at that moment we needed that book again, and the world needed that book again in that mass printing format. Unfortunately, I think maybe we're looking at a time of instant gratification, capitalism, all these things but you are so right in saying, and I don't really necessarily ever think about writing creatively, like in the way that you're connecting with writers and illustrators. But actually it is true, like you have to write what is true to you. And I think I'm beginning to appreciate that in an academic sense for myself as well. Even though I'm not necessarily doing something creative, I have to write something and I have to do research on something that I connect with, because I'm the only one that can then tell that story or write that history.
Exactly,
yeah, that's a really important point. And I think I'm happy to hear that publishing is making some steps.
It is. It's trying. And I think in the last few years as well, especially the last few years, it has really accelerated that. Not just in terms of the books that go out there, but the people behind the books. I was surprised when I first came into publishing, because I kind of, I knew of publishing and I kind of went in a little bit blind and I didn't do any research. I didn't, I just wanted to see, let's just see what happens. Which I'm really grateful for, because I think also when you go in with too much stuff, sometimes you kind of talk yourself out of it, or you kind of see things that makes you question things. So I kind of went in blind, but thinking, oh my gosh, it must be so diverse. Look at all the books on the shelves. No, absolutely not. That was the bigger shock. And as I started in 2020,
Yeah.
very soon everything, George Floyd was murdered and the whole industry was like quivering in their boots. At the same time, I was having conversations for the Fab Prize and for the Fab website, having conversations with people of color from different parts of publishing, from editorial, like literally across the board, and hearing their experiences, I was like, oh, we have got a lot of work to do. I think now when you look at those in-house, there is a lot more representation. There's still not enough. We're still very much a minority, but there is a lot more representation. There's a lot more awareness of what needs to be done.
What do you think, if anything, or if you had to, call out publishing more broadly for their next, I don't know, 5-year, 10-year plan? What are the things they need to do next, or how does the ball keep rolling within your industry?
I think we need to keep questioning things. I think we need to keep questioning how things are done and why they're done that way, and change them where needed. Publishing is a very old industry, and there's a lot of sort of heritage. And I think across the board, people are very much questioning, what can we do differently, and how can we do it differently? How can we? And I think that needs to be an ongoing conversation. We can't do things as we've always done them. I think all of us have bias. We all have bias, and we all need to check those biases when we are doing the work we're doing. And again, it's not just in terms of editorial, but really across the board. And also keep looking and keep reading things that are outside of your own experience. Because I think that's the only way we can garner any form of understanding. I was going to say sympathy and empathy, and I think those are very important, but more so than that, we need to come to a point of understanding.
Absolutely.
And I think without that work being done, I think something I've really realized in the last couple of years is we are all very much at the same table, but we've had to get here in very different ways, and we can't disregard the path that has led us here. And because of that, the way I work and the way you work won't be the same. We can't work in that way. So let's work to each other's strengths. And again, I think my team are really supportive of this. Sometimes I just think, am I just trying to tick off all of the points of diversity I can? I'm also very neurodivergent. So I think how that impacts my work, and actually thinking, as a whole team, we've had to consider, how do we then work to all of our collective strengths?
Nice.
And how do we each make sure that we have the support that we need? And it's that kind of work that needs to keep being done. It's so easy to say, okay, here are the big things that we want to do, but really on a day-to-day basis, how are we making sure that those big things happen?
Absolutely. Wow.
I
love that. Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing that. Thank you so much for that, Amma. It is really important, I think, the work you're doing. Well, I know within publishing, and I think I speak about a lot on this podcast the fact that we're all working. We all have to work in society in our own respective fields. There's no point me, who does history, going to tell the police how to do their job. Although I probably could do a better job than some of them at the moment, just saying. Just saying.
I don't know that.
But like, if everybody chips away to make society a little bit better, to move, as you said, with love, the love that Bell Hooks is speaking about in wider society, whether that be in politics, in education, in publishing, in history, that is how I think we shape and carve out a society that makes best sense for the majority of the people in it, is more equitable, is more loving, is more compassionate. And so I hope if you're listening today, you kind of carry that with you, carry the sentiments of that with you in your own work, whether that's in your family, it doesn't even have to be in a place of work, in your friend group,
community, in
your community, in your church, especially in your church.
They need it.
Absolutely. I wondered if you wanted to share anything you have coming up, anything, future projects. We should probably plug the Queen Mary Alumni Angles podcast.
Yes.
That is available on Spotify. It's 2 years old, but if you wanted to hear our thoughts, it was a really good episode, though. I'm sorry, not to toot my own horn. I wish we recorded it. We said some things. It's also on YouTube, so you can watch it and just see us vibing, doing our thing. I'll put the link in the show notes. But yeah, if you have anything else, or if you want to let us know your social medias and where people can find you.
Yeah, I am at noir.renaissance on everything. That might not be true. I might be at noir.renaissance on Instagram and noir renaissance on Twitter or X.
I'll put it in the show notes if you're not, so they'll be able to find you anyway. And
I will also say, if you are an aspiring writer or illustrator, do check out the Fab Prize for children specifically. I think that's a really great opportunity to get your work seen by agents. I've been working a lot on Studio at the moment and just sort of going through her narrative. So there's a lot of like fiction writing that's going on my Instagram at the moment, which is quite fun to do.
Nice.
And just keep creating, keep doing, keep expressing yourself, however that looks to you. I think is really important to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for being here for this episode today. If you're listening and you want to know more about Amma and the work that she's doing, check her out on socials, Instagram and X as well, and her work just more broadly. Just give her a Google and you'll see. But thank you so much, Amma. Honestly, it's such a pleasure to be sat down here talking with you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No worries. Right. Thank you for listening to the History Hotline. If you've enjoyed this episode, please tell a friend to tell a friend. To continue the conversation about Black history, head over to our social media platforms at the History Hotline on Instagram and at the History HL on Twitter.